welcome to What Lingers, the podcast where we uncover the questions behind people's stories. I'm Christian Figueroa.
And I'm Liz Melchor, and we are the team behind Storytelling Lisboa, where once a month, 10 storytellers get on stage in front of 200 people and tell true and personal stories related to a theme.
It is always a great event, but there is a catch. We always have lingering questions for the storytellers and no format to ask them. Until now.
In this second season of What Lingers, we invite storytellers to revisit and listen back to their original story from that night, and then sit down with us for a conversation to uncover what lingers for us all.
Just a heads up, the recording of the story you will hear comes from the actual stage of Storytelling Lisboa, so the sound might be a little bit fuzzy.
Christian, I'm so excited for the story today, because actually one of my strongest memories during the story was your reaction. You were so emotional and I loved it. You were tearing up by me. You were weeping. But it was an immensely touching story.
Yeah, I have to say that's what cancers do. That's what I do. This story touched me in a level I cannot explain, but the storyteller is also such an amazing soul, and we are so lucky that he is in Lisbon sharing his life in his story. So let's hand over to Seb telling a story on the theme distance.
Hey everyone, I'm Seb. I'm from Sweden, and I'm a grandma's boy. My grandma has been probably one of the biggest inspirations of my life, and a huge influence as well. And she had a tough time. Soon after I was born, my grandpa died in a drowning accident. My mother was her only child, so naturally, me, and then later on my younger sister, became her entire world. And she would just shower us in unconditional love. She would often tell me this story. She would always laugh when she told this story. I've been 6 years old. I ran into the kitchen crying because I cut my finger. When she asked me, how did you cut your finger? Oh, I was playing with the knives and then I cut myself. She said, suit yourself. Well, what does that mean, Grandma? Well, you know you're not allowed to play with the knives. You did it anyway, and you cut yourself. So suit yourself. And I apparently looked her dead in the eyes and said, Grandma, never ever say those words again. But she would never judge us, nor me nor my sister. And we had a close bond. But at the age of 7, my family moved to another town, about 6 hours away. And this was the first time I started to experience distance from people I love. Now she will come visit for a couple of weeks now and then, and we would visit her. It was lovely. But there was another distance as well that started to grow within the family. So my father worked a lot, would come home rarely, but usually late at night, and we had a hard time connecting. My mother was great. She did everything she could have done, having a job herself, taking care of a 2-story house, and having 2 undiagnosed ADHD kids in the house. God bless her. But it was tough. So at the age of 16, coming up to high school, I saw an opportunity to leave home and become independent. And I took it. And by doing so, I increased that distance just a little bit more. And during that time, my parents separated. My mother moved with my sister to a new city. My dad moved to Norway with his new girlfriend. No one said a thing. No one explained anything. You just have to understand it when there was a new person in the house. Everyone but my grandma. Now she would speak her mind. She would sit down for a cup of coffee and she would dress every single elephant in the room like they were her own kids. And she would do it with this ease. No problem. Just everyday stuff. Even though it was hard stuff. And I got really close to her. I mean, one thing she did once, I remember calling her. My mom was going to visit her over that weekend. And I asked her if my mom had arrived yet. And she told me, no, she's over at the hospital with your grandpa. Wait a second, my grandpa died. Oh, no, your biological grandfather. No one told you about that? No one told me about that. Well, she said, it was a piece of shit. I ain't gonna see him again. Your mother is so loving kind that she went to see him on his deathbed. And then we never spoke about it again. But it was different with my grandma, because she would put me at ease. We didn't have to talk about it again, because she had calmed that down. I saw my grandma as the emotional pillar in my life. And together, we were the glue of the family. Then in my mid-20s, I moved to Spain, or I was living in Spain. Even further distance now. It could go up to 6 months without me talking to a single family member. It was also this time my grandma was diagnosed with cancer. It hit hard, really hard. It was a pain I'd never felt before. And while I suffered, she didn't change at all. She was still happy. She was still doing her things, her activities. Every spring she would go to the south of Spain, and every fall as well, for a few weeks to play golf, rent an apartment by herself, and just meet new people and hang out with them. And I would take the bus down from Madrid, 7 hours, and spend a week with her. We wouldn't do much, play a little bit of golf, eat some food, have a tinto verano or two, but sometimes just sit with our iPads. And she would ask me, Seb, are you not bored? It's just me and a bunch of old people, we're not doing anything. I was never bored around her. I was at ease. Around her, wherever she was the only place that felt like home. And we would talk about the hard stuff as well. Death, life, history, and that too. She would always talk with it, but this casual ease. Like one time she was driving me in her car, and we called it the Red Danger. It was the forward focus, barely worked, and in the middle of the Swedish uncomfortable silence that always happens, she told me that when she dies, I'll get the car. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to think about that. She's like, no. Listen, my friend 2 weeks ago, super healthy, really fit, fell in the shower, hit her head and died. Could happen any moment, and he just wanted you to know you get the car. I appreciate that. Good, grandma. But then, of course, there would be a day when the call came. We didn't know it was going to be a month, a week, or a day. And I wasn't going to wait. I took the first flight I could from Spain to Sweden. I was the next day in the hospital, and I entered the room. She was laying in bed. My mom was sitting next to her. She smiled when I came in, but I could see she was in pain. And we chatted for a little while, till the nurses came in and they had to change her. And we thought it would be a good moment for me and my mom to go and grab some lunch. But on our way out, my grandma turns to me and she says, Seth, and she laughs a bit between the pain. She said, isn't it funny? Like I watched you so many times in diapers, and now here I am, in diapers. But then she quickly turned to my mom and made it really clear that she had to go home and book that apartment for the next Spain trip. Because if you didn't book in time, you didn't get the one on the third floor in the corner. And she's right, it was the best one. And we promised, and we left. Now those would be her last words to us. When we came back that afternoon, she was unconscious, and we couldn't reach her. That night, I spent next to her bed together with my mom. We're watching TV, having some pizza, and all of a sudden the breathing changes of my grandma. And we didn't have to say anything, we knew what was happening. So we got up on each side of her bed, holding each of her hands in one of her hands, and me and my mom holding our hands together. And I was standing in front of the moment that I feared, even before the diagnosis. The biggest fear I had was to lose my grandma, my pillar, my partner that was keeping this family together. But then, a strange thing happened. as she took her last breath, in an instant, and I could feel it, the distance between me and my mother vanished. And ever since that day, we've been closer. We talk about our feelings. We ask the hard questions. And we share, genuinely share with each other. My grandma also taught me something very, very important. And that was to not let fear of death to get in the way of living life. That lesson came very well in handy a couple of years ago when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age 62. Now, that pain was just as hard as the other news I got. It's terrible. It's a horrible pain. But it was different this time. It eased up a little faster. And I'm genuinely happy that when I go see my mom these days, we are not sad. We are not anxious. We talk about these things, but we accept them and we cherish every moment we have together, like they were eternity. And I genuinely know that my mom is gonna be with me forever, ever. Because my grandma, she is with me every single day. And I'm forever going to be her little friend.
Oh my God, Seb. I'm always speechless in front of you. Thank you so much for being here with us for this episode of What Lingers. Would you please be so kind to introduce yourself for the people listening at home?
For sure. First of all, thank you for having me on the podcast and having me on Storytelling Lisboa. It is an event I treasure dearly, dearly, dearly. I go by Sebastian. I'm from Sweden. I've been living here in Lisbon for about 3 years. Spent many years outside of Sweden. I left there in my early 20s and now reside here in Lisbon. I spend a lot of my time on storytelling. I find that is what makes my heart sing.
Oh, I love that. And I loved watching your story back. And actually, that's going to be my first question for you is, how was that to watch back? Have you watched it back since you told it? And did it bring up new feelings?
So I've actually watched this quite a few times. First of all, because I always watch my stories again. I aspire to become a better storyteller. It can get awkward.
Yeah, I'm like, that's admirable because it can be really hard to watch yourself back, but it is sort of a necessary part of the process. So congratulations that you're able to do that. I'm not always so able to.
Yeah, so it is hard, right? You got to get over that initial awkwardness. The funny thing, though, is that you do that a couple of times and you kind of help yourself become your own little buddy. You can distance yourself. Rewatching it has been okay. Practicing it was a whole different matter. I did my rehearsal the night before. So the way I do that is I rehearse out loud. I go around in the apartment and I do it over and over again. Only this time I was just bawling. Crying. I think my neighbors might think I'm nuts because I was just repeating the same story over and over loud and crying. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is never going to work. How am I going to do this on stage?
Wow. And so I think that when you told that story, the room, like there was such an emotional response to it. And so it's not surprising to me at all that in practicing, you had so much emotion, even if you didn't exactly cry on stage. I was sitting next to Christian and Christian was extremely emotional during your story. It really touched his heart. And I saw it touched your heart again today, Christian. I wanted to ask Christian, what was it about Seb's story that really touched you?
Yeah, I'm in tears. Sorry for that. I thought I was not going to cry today because I cried last night rewatching it. I was like, okay, this is enough. Yeah, there's something about your story that touches the human experience of losing someone, of loving someone and being distant. And I think you have such a great power of connecting with your own emotions and putting it out there on stage. So powerful that every time I watch this story specifically, it brings me to tears. And this process that you had, I remember we talked a little bit after the stage and you mentioned crying the night before. Well, we've been saying this a lot about the healing process of retelling our stories, but I just think there's so much pure emotional connection from your story and the way you tell your story that just touches my heart in a way I cannot even explain. I'm having a hard time finding the words.
I'm wondering for Seb, what it was like to have an audience, like to have Christian or at the main event. I think a lot of people were in tears in the audience. And could you feel that from the stage? And how did that make you feel?
So this story and going up and telling this story, and this is not an exaggeration in any way, it has actually had a life-changing impact.
Oh, wow.
First of all, rehearsing it, building a narrative around trauma helps you understand it. It's hard to revisit things. This gave me a reason to go into this and with a purpose. So I could distance myself still. I was just not thinking about stuff, right? I was putting together a story and it had to be done. Like, cry as much as you want. You're going on stage tomorrow. We got to get through this, right? And in that, there was a level of therapy to it. I have told 2 stories before this event. I tend to tell more funny stories, joke around a bit. Okay, I need to dig deeper to improve my storytelling. Do something that is actually deep down in here, right? So then to your question, how was it different? So the 2 first stories I told there, if I look back and I remember that evening, I didn't see the audience. I was comfortable and everything, but I didn't see them. When I think back at that evening, I remember distinct faces, people I connected with in the audience. I had to avoid looking at you, Christian, a bit, because then I would have started crying. That was like,
I'm sorry. Yeah, that was not bad. I was sobbing so badly.
I connected so much deeper with the audience in this story, being vulnerable. And I think that's the key.
Amazing. Speaking about that night, I remember thinking and telling Liz, like, this is just so vulnerable, so raw. But also, I question myself frequently. I'm a gay cis man on stage. And then I was seeing you on stage and I wonder, you are such a different person from what I know. I mean, I come from Colombia, I live in Brazil, then I moved to Portugal. And I have this idea of my masculinity in my head, of course. And we all have. We're still living in patriarchy. But you started your story saying that I'm a grandma's boy. And that was amazing for me because there was this man not being afraid of talking about his emotions. And I'm curious about how being this grandma's boy shaped your relationship with traditional masculinity and how is your relationship with other men that are more in the fit of the patriarchy, toxic masculinity model.
First of all, after doing this story and you gave me your thoughts on it, I've thought about this a lot more because it's like, okay, yeah, there's something there. So if I look back in my history of my life, definitely I have a strong feminine side and I am very proud of it throughout my life. Most of my friends, close friends have been women. I connect easier with women than I connect with men. And in a very masculine environment, I feel a bit out of it. And it was when you made that comment, because you came up to me, I remember this very well, and you said, Seb, I get you now. I get why you are the way you are, with the impact your grandmother had on you, with the impact your mother has had on you. And I am very proud of it. And you know this very well, like you said, in the society that we have traditionally, if you're a boy becoming a man, you have to man up. And it was the same way for me growing up. So I suppressed a lot of emotions throughout my life for a very, very, very long time, which then took many years of therapy and meditation, mindfulness to reach, because I pushed it so far away to the point where, well, so here's the thing, right? If you push one emotion away, you push them all away. You can't have happiness without sadness. These are opposites that have to live. If there's only happiness, there's nothing. There has to be a contrary, right? So by pushing away those hard feelings, manning up, that's what they say, right? I was not experiencing the happiness that I wanted to. So it's been a very deliberate journey for me to connect with that deeper, connect with those emotions. And yeah, telling a story like this is definitely part of that process.
Yeah, because it connects you to those feelings. And masculinity is one part, but culture is another big part of it, right? Like you're Swedish. I mean, I have my own notions of Swedish is not to be really super connected to emotions or super expressive of emotions. And in the story, you talk about this uncomfortable silence, the Swedish uncomfortable silence. It's like a normal thing. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about sort of like the Swedish culture and also how that has impacted you.
Absolutely. So a comment I often get when I meet new people and they get to know me and say, well, I'm from Sweden. I'm like, well, you're not very Swedish. I've met Swedish people. Like, you're not a real Swede, you know. I'll get cold when it's 20 degrees outside. I'm like, nah, you're not Swedish. And I had a hard time connecting with Swedish culture even as a youngster. And I left Sweden when I was 18 years old. And I haven't lived in Sweden since then. I like to go and visit. There's a lot of things I love with Sweden. There's some fantastic things. And with diversity, Sweden has made a lot of progress, especially talking, either if it's masculinity, femininity, you being yourself. There is a strong movement to change these types. And I know my friends that I have, even my male friends, right? So I'm straight and I have straight friends, but we will hold hands. We will hug. We will talk about feelings. We will cry. And that's my tribe in Sweden. So if I think back, I hold that part dearly. But that's a very new thing. And then we have the generations before, and that was a whole different matter. And then, I mean, I think we could go into a bunch of theories why that could be: the dark, the cold in the winter. You know, it's small country, a lot of small towns, right? You know, you live far away from other people. I don't relate to a lot of those parts. I feel a bit estranged in Sweden. I feel more comfortable in the south of Europe, maybe because I'm very social, maybe because I like sunshine and red wine, who knows? But it has definitely shaped me. And to end that question, I can now, as I'm diving more into my emotions, after doing this mindfulness, after learning more about myself, I'm actually noticing that now I'm pretty Swedish after. Like, there's a lot of things that I have, and that's a good feeling, right? Because I can treasure those. There are things that I have from my culture that I think are great, and I'm happy for them. So it's a constant learning journey, I guess.
Absolutely, yes. I was thinking, well, you left when you were 18, you know, like, but those are formative years. So, like, even myself, I left Colombia when I was in my 20s as well, but I'm still a big bunch of Colombian things inside of us. So, and speaking about culture and the things that raises and make the people who we are, I'm thinking a lot about your grandma and her way of addressing life when she was diagnosed with cancer, and making all these jokes about the diapers and everything. And I remember when you were on stage telling the story, I was thinking, this is such a strong woman. And that's when I came to you and told you, I get you now. I know where you're coming from, because probably you grew up in kind of a matriarchy system with your grandma and your mother being like very strong women. And it reminds me a lot of my mom, of course, that she had to be there for us. And I was wondering if, and I don't want to be the bringing the sad part of the story, but
all emotions are good.
Yes,
and
good.
Necessary.
That's a good reminder. That do you think that your grandma was behaving like this because of the Swedish culture? Why do you think your grandma was the way she was?
That is a really good question. And so, thinking honestly about that, we rarely had a conversation. I have a hard time. Well, I can remember her crying, but that would be when we were kids and we would say goodbye, and she would cry to say goodbye from us, and normal things, right? And when talking about the harder things, no, we actually rarely got really into the sad part. And upon reflection, that's definitely something I would have wanted, I think. And I think that would have been good for the both of us. I think she kept a lot inside. I think it was a lot toughen up. And she had gone through so much hardship. And we have to think back now, we were talking to generations before Sweden has changed. Back then, being a woman, like, she would tell me a lot of stories. She had been through burnouts, tough things. And I think she this was her sort of coping mechanism. Stay busy. She would stay busy. And for sure, there were thoughts there that I have never heard, and stories that I have never heard that would probably have been good for her to tell. But who knows? Maybe she did that with my mother, and they were always very close. And there's always been this thing in my family of protecting, right? We want to shield you from this. And this is a lot of things I don't know, right? I mentioned that I had a biological grandfather that I knew nothing about. And a lot of this came from shielding and wanting to protect. And in full honesty, I think that wanting to do that as well came from the hardship they had experienced. And they want to create a new world for me and my sister where these things didn't exist. So she could probably have benefit from that. Me and my grandmother all been very similar. So then in terms of Swedish culture and the time that I knew her and that we were together, I mean, she was the black sheep in the village. She would, go to the beat of her own drum. She would do what she wanted. She would rant sometimes. She would have her friends over and say, I can't stand these people anymore. They just sit and complain and they're so dull. And that's why she would love to go to Spain. I lived outside of Madrid for 2 years in a small town called Segovia. And she loved to come and visit me there. And she told me this. She loved Tinto Veranos, by the way. That was her favorite drink. And there were all these old friend groups who would go, retired people walking down the main street and, arm in arm and chatting. When she turned to me one time and looked at them, and she said, that's life. That's what I want. That's how I want it to be. And I think that fueled a lot her trips to Spain. I'll tell you, and she would ask me, why do you want me to come along? Like, you're the life of the party. Of course, we want you to come along.
I love her. She sounds so fun.
Absolute incredible woman. Absolutely.
And then question about your biological grandfather. Is that something that has remained a secret? Do you just know now that he exists and you don't know what happened? And are you curious?
I'm actually not so curious in a healthy way, I would say. So being younger when there was all these things not said, it's hard when you're young, like you were pointing out before, Christian, that age when, you're finding your path, you're finding yourself. You have so much to figure out. This was just too much. And I would sort of say, take a pride in like, no, we're a different family. Like, we don't need to talk about that. We don't do that. Like, that's not what we do. And then very similar to them, what we just talked about, how my grandma would do things. I would just stay busy, stay positive and do my thing, right? But no, I am not so curious about it anymore in the sense that I value the trust that they can say what they feel was necessary to be said. After all, that's not my story. That's their story. And I think it's important to respect someone and let them tell the story they want to tell and what they don't want to tell in a way. It wouldn't change much for me. I have opened up, so like I tell in the end of the story, we talk a lot more, me and my mother. And there is now a foundation that if she would like to share any of this, she could. And if she don't, then that's okay. I rather focus on the present moment and the people that were in my life. My step grandfather that I never got to meet, though, heard plenty of stories of him. In the end, right, it's what is being passed on then, all the good stories of the person who's worthy to be kept in our memory. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So I think that's why I'm not so curious about that part, actually. I got what I wanted, and I got the stories that I wanted and can be satisfied with that.
It tells a lot about you as well. Like this, there's so much respect about respecting that side of your grandma's life or story that she didn't want it to give away, and nobody is going after that. So that's amazing. I'm thinking about something that you said during the story, is that your grandma was this emotional cornerstone, and that you also were, like, you and your grandma were the glue of the family. And that hit me so bad because I also feel like that, of course, inside my family. And maybe because of that, I felt so much compassion, because that's beautiful, but also could become like a burden or like a heavy weight at some point. And I'm wondering what this means for your family, you and your grandma being the glue of the family, and now that she's gone?
That's a very good question. And like you say, it's a lot of work, huh? It's a lot of work taking on that responsibility. And it's work that is not really rewarding. You're not going to get a prize for doing that. You're not going to, good job, Seb. You kept it all together. And why is there no prize in the end for that? Because it's usually just up here. So this is my story, right? This is how I saw it. If we look at this objectively, I don't think I was the glue. But you can see this a lot with, I was still quite older. I didn't felt the separation hurt me a lot from my parents, but I've heard stories from other people who were very young in the part of the separation. And kids tend to put a lot of guilt on themselves, right? This is my fault. I'm in the middle of this. I need to fix this. But now being an adult, right? It's very interesting to look back and getting closer to the age that your parents were when these things happen, you get a new perspective. So it's easy to look at kids roaming around. It's like, yeah, they don't know what's going on, and you'll protect them, and they do their thing. But it's in the small things and what's in your mind, right? So, of course, nothing changed there. What happened though was, and over the years that came after this, is when you start to realize that it's all in your head, right? So I had built that. I'd taken on that role, and in doing so, I believe I created behaviors in other parts of the family based on that, right? So if I take it on to hear something from my father talking about the family, hearing something from my mother, and then I want to bridge that gap and try to mediate and try to make sure that everyone is happy, sift through. It's like, oh, I'll share this, but I'll keep this to myself, and I'll support them with that, and I'll support them with that. It wears you down. It really, it's a lot of hard work, but they don't see that. And that's not putting blame on anyone, right? Like that's how we work as human beings. So what came after a while after this, quite a long time after the happening of my grandmother's passing, was that I stopped doing that. And I started actually quite recently setting boundaries instead. So rather than being the flexible one that could make everything work, I would say, this I'm okay with, and this I'm not okay with. This is what I believe in, and this is what I think about your behavior, and this is what I need. And the interesting thing when you do that is you set your own boundaries, you make it clear what you need, then a lot of these problems disappear. And actually, things have become better for me doing less.
Yeah, like when you're better glue now with better boundaries, now that you think you're not the glue, sort of.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because you told yourself a story about your role, and now you're looking back on that story and realizing that might not have been completely true. Intersections with like storytelling on a stage, and then stories you tell yourself, and like how powerful stories can be, but also not always in a pot. Like sometimes they can be kind of not negative, but yeah, you can over-identify with a story that you think is your truth, the absolute truth. Does this make sense? Am I even? Okay.
100%.
Like,
yeah.
I was thinking about my own grandmother a little bit. I feel like my grandma and your grandma like could have hung out. That she liked to drink wine too. Once I went to breakfast with her at 9 a.m, and she had like a white wine and pancakes, and I was like, "Who are you, Grandma?" And my grandma also told me that she never cried. She cried twice in her life. Once was cutting her finger, and once was my grandpa like thought he had a heart attack, but it was a panic attack. And these were 2 moments in her life that she cried, and she told me this at like 80 years old. And I was thinking about it because we're talking about your grandma and like being this like pillar of strength. And you did see your grandma cry with goodbyes, but never like other emotions. And I've thought a lot about my own grandma and like this hidden emotion part. Is it true my grandma never cried? Or did she have this like secret, deep emotional, like brooding part that I never saw? And part of me thinks she just honestly didn't have that. She didn't seem to have this like dark brooding part, which I got. I had to spend a lot of time, I think similar to you, spend a lot of time figuring out my own feelings, because I also grew up in a family where feelings weren't talked about in a very open way, in a way that, so it was confusing to me all the time. But you talked about your grandma being like this pillar, being this like center, and it wasn't necessarily that she was like the one who was like emotionally tending to you in a talking way, right? Like she wasn't like opening you up like emotionally and like dealing with your feelings, but she had this like really strong emotional strength. And I'm wondering like how you explain that. Like what was it that she had in her that gave her that, like home, that sense of home?
That's really, really, really good question. I think it goes a bit to what we just talked about, setting boundaries, right? So things would be clear with her. I did not have to figure things out. I knew, because she would tell me, and she would tell anyone what she thought. If she didn't like someone, they would know it. Like no, no uncertainties at all. And I think that made me calm, because I didn't have to kind of figure her out. Now, on the sad parts, I can relate to this a lot, is in the context you're in, right? So I've myself struggled with opening up to people and sharing emotion. I still do to a certain degree. I'm working a lot on it. And what would happen when I was younger, I could sit home and I could be really, really sad. And I would say, you know what? I'm going to call my friend and we're going to go sit down and I'm going to talk to them. And then I would come and I would sit down with my friend. But now I'm in a different setting. Now I'm with my friend. This is nice. Now I feel good. And I would rather say, you know what? Forget about that. How was the weekend? Let's talk about something fun. Because I don't want to talk about that now when it's a good environment and I feel good. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think my grandma was very much the same. She kept very active, very social. Who knows what went on when she was alone? And she did spend a lot of time alone. I tried to call her very often. And she would call me now and then as well. On a side note, that there's one moment that was just hilarious. So she was so active. I remember I lived in Madrid. And it was a Friday evening, and I was staying at home, and I was calling my grandma. And I thought, this is a good moment to call her. I don't want her to be alone. And she picks up the phone in a rush. It's like, what is it? And I'm like, yeah, let's see how you're doing. It's like, yeah, well, not now. I'm busy. I'm like, what? I was like, yeah, I'm in church. I'm hanging out with my friends. We're going to sing. We'll have to call me another day. And then she hung up. And I was like, wow, it's Friday evening. I'm sitting home alone, and my grandma's too busy to talk to me.
I feel like my grandparents were similar. Sometimes I was like, dude, they're more social and like more wild than me, Like, but I think what you say makes total sense, that you could trust her to hold herself.
I think so. And that gave me a calm, right? That's what the pillar.
I mean, and I think that makes sense, especially if you're growing up feeling like you need to internally make these like internal moves to take care of everybody else. And then with her, you're like, nope, my grandma's got herself. And that is a very relaxing and amazing feeling.
I love the fact that you told us that she was like the black sheep, because that immediately tells us that she was super cool, and probably we are all the black sheep of our own families. I'm wondering, because you mentioned your sister in your story, I know also from my own family that the relationship with the mothers and the male figure and the female figure, it's totally different. I wonder if your sister feels the same way about your grandmother or your mom as you feel about your grandmother and your mom.
Also a very good question. So first of all, I know she doesn't feel the same. I know we have a very different experience. And the reason for that is that we talk about it nowadays. We've also gotten a lot closer in older years. 4 years difference between us. So I moved from home when I was 16 years old. She was 12 years old at that time. And 4 years is a lot at that age, right? So you're so busy in your own, and she was busy in her own. And we had things that we connected with. What has happened more now in later years, when we talk more, we open to each other more, we're also seeing the areas that we were very connected with. We both like to dress up. So we would go on these competitions together, either a Renaissance fair, I would be a knight, she would be a princess. And we went on, they had in that small town we grew up in, every year a costume contest. We loved this. And my mother would do anything in terms of costume we wanted to do, she would go for it, like proper. And we would spend weeks preparing these. We often won the competitions.
What was the best costume?
The best one was the Pikachu one. So my sister had this edge, right? Because she was cute. And she was like this little cute, nice girl, right? And I can't really compete against that. So she blew the competition out. She is today a cosplayer, and she goes on international stages. She is in the Swedish championships. She's participating in European championships. Unfortunately, due to COVID, she couldn't participate when she was invited to, or she won her right to compete in Japan, in Tokyo.
Quick question about this. Cosplaying, there's competitions around the world?
Absolutely. So her full-time profession, she's a costume designer for the theater, or she makes costumes.
Amazing.
That's what she does. I'm so amazed by these events. They're incredible. So cosplay, just for those who don't know, is you reenact a figure from either a cartoon. There's a lot of anime. It could be a video game. It's that part of the culture. All these events they have for cosplayers, there's a lot of freedom. You do what you want to. You dress up as much as you want to. But when you compete, there's some strict rules, and you have to make everything yourself. Like, you can't buy a costume and go up on stage. No, you have to make it your own. And then there's a whole range of it. So she does sewing, and that's her specific trade. And then you see people who are knights, and they make these foam armors and everything. And then they're judged on two specific points. One is, of course, the craft. How well have they made their costume? And the second part is the reenactment. So they have to go up on stage and perform a show that represents that character. It's for anyone listening, if you get a chance to visit a cosplay event, it is one of the most beautiful things there is. With full transparency, there's a lot of cringe moments. And my sister and I discussed this because we went to one here in Portugal when she visited me last year. It is very cringe. Everyone knows it is a bit cringe, and they own up to do it. It's like, doesn't matter. And I can tell you, I cry every time I go to a cosplay event. So it's just the energy and the joy and the acceptance, you know? If you want to play this character, go do it. Let it be as cringe as you want to. Just live it, enjoy it, and you will have thousands of people supporting you in their own costumes at various degrees. I could go on forever with this. I am incredibly impressed by my sister. I respect her a lot. She is incredible in what she does, and so we are a lot more closer nowadays. We talk more often, and we talk actually about the tough stuff. She is a great emotional support to me these days, and I am to her.
And also, I want a whole spin-off episode on cosplay, and I want to now go. But I like how you describe it as cringe, but completely accepting of cringe, which perhaps is the beauty of it, that it's like a very full acceptance sort of place. And I really love and appreciate that. So your story ends with sort of a turn, which is another relationship inside your family, which is with your mother. And sort of like this beautiful image of your mother and your grandmother and you holding hands as your grandmother dies. As she dies, like this distance between you and your mother, you explain it in the story, is suddenly evaporates. And I'm wondering if now looking back on that, you understand why.
My thought around that is, so we talked a bit before, right? Talking about emotions. And you said it very well, Liz. There are no good or bad emotions. Like, that's a label we put on them. Like, they're feelings, but they're all things happening up here or in other parts of the body. Not to say that, don't care about your feelings and listen to your feelings. But I think there comes a point where often it's the fear and the avoidance of those feelings that is causing the actual suffering. I'm missing a person and I want to be with them, I'm not with them. And that's a clash. And that is causing anxiety, and that causes suffering. And much the same when you go through something really traumatic, something that just hurts so much. Good thing when this happened, I'd already started therapy due to a burn-up earlier. I had started my mindfulness journey, and I had a lot of tools that made me say, I'm going to sit and feel this. Something magical happens when you do that. Of course, it hurts. Like, it's not going to help making it less painful. That doesn't exist. But what it does is that it makes sort of a sense out of it, because that feeling is important. If that's coming up, that needs to be processed, and this is your body doing the work. And you got to let it. And I think then to your question, not to go off the rails completely here, in that moment, like I said, this fear of losing my grandmother, and it had been my whole life. Like, I have memories as a kid in bed, my mother tucking me in, and I'm crying, and she asked me, why you're crying? Like, well, I don't want grandma to die. Imagine hearing that from your kid who was like 10 years old in bed, ready to sleep. It was like, there wouldn't be no reason. Like, there was no reason for that, but it was a fear I had in me. And in that moment, I faced that fear. It happened. all those emotions came. It was painful. It was just so painful. But then after that breath passed, there I was. I'm still here. And here is my mother. And I have my mother, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Even if I am in all this pain, I'm still here. I'm still living.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I love how you describe that too, because I really think that there's like this thing with like the ultimate heartbreak, your ultimate fear about the world came true. Like the worst thing possible came true for you. And of course it was going to. Like your grandma was going to die one day. And if you can sit through that heartbreak, it's like you realize that you can survive your biggest fear. And I feel like that makes the world open so much more completely. It's like your heartbreak's open, you know? And it sounds like a bit like maybe that's what happened. That then you could relate to your mother in a new way.
Absolutely. And we'd shared that moment, right? So she must have felt something similar, right?
Yeah,
that was her
yeah.
mother passing.
Yeah.
But there I was. She wasn't alone. We had each other.
Seb, thank you so much. You've been so amazing, and we're so grateful that, again, you're here with us, sharing all of your stories and about your family. People listening to the podcast won't tell, but I remember that day while listening to your story, that towards the end, there was such a climax of your story that people just got clapping, and they kind of stop your story. And you had this sensitivity, which I don't think all the storytellers have, to know when to stop. Probably because in our minds we have this script of what's the end of the story. And I could tell that your story wasn't ending when people were clapping already. You had something else to say and you couldn't, because we were also emotional and clapping and cheering for you. Would you mind sharing what was the actual ending of your story that night?
I want to thank the audience for that reaction, because that was a better ending. That's where the story should have ended. So thank you to everyone who was there and boosted me up. And in that moment, like you said, how do you know, like, to stop there? I was like, well, ain't gonna get better than this. It's like, there's no way it's gonna get better than this. And in addition to that, what I wanted to do in the end is something that I've often done in other situations in my life that I'm trying to get away from, is always end on a positive note. So I wanted to make a reflection back to her car, the Red Danger, the Ford Focus that she had offered me, that when she dies, I would get the car. The thing is, that car was not in a state to drive at all. So I planned to end the story by a little joke that, we had to put that in as garbage, because I would never, ever, ever in my life drive that car. But that would have taken away from something very beautiful. So yeah, big thank you to everyone in the audience. And of course, thank you to you guys for having me.
But I'm cracking up too, like thinking, okay, so you inherited the Red Danger and then you scrapped the Red Danger.
Yeah, and even that was hard. No one wanted it, and I would try to get rid of it. It was hard to get rid of it. So for some reason, it was like, when you don't get the clutch right,
yeah,
it would do that all the time, like for no reason. It was just a car that was shit.
I don't know why, that's just kind of funny.
Oh my God. Yeah, I was thinking that, it wouldn't be beautiful to have something from your grandma, but yeah, when
I have this, she gave me a ring, and I'm carrying this every day. This is my memory of my grandma. I've had other rings. There's no other ring that I'm ever getting as many questions and compliments about as this ring. So yeah, I don't need the car. Screw that.
The ring's better. The ring's better. It's also just funny because it isn't exactly the expected thing. The expected thing would be like, oh, the Red Danger's in my garage and it's like my treasured possession, but it's like, oh, God, that piece of junk. But the final question that we have for you today, and gosh, thank you so much for doing this and being on our stage and taking a risk on our stage, because I know it was the first story that you told. But how has it been for you revisiting your story today? And
very nice. So it sort of changed the narrative, and doing this story, the whole process, rehearsing it, I had to move things around. And one thing that has really, really done, and every time I look back at it, is that I have made sense out of that narrative. So one thing I've realized after doing the story, before, when I would think back at the time from when my grandmother got diagnosed and when she passed away, felt like an eternity. It was like, oh, it was so long time. Telling the story, I realized that was the span of maybe 2-3 years. It was actually not a long time. And that told me that, wow, you were deep in it. Like, that was very painful, that it felt like, if something, if it is cold, or if the foot hurts, it's an eternity, right? It's like, is this ever gonna end? But then looking back at it, it was not that long a time. So then to know that, okay, make use of the moment, be in the moment, things pass really quick. And, but also, oh, wow, that it wasn't all bad. Like, it wasn't all bad during that period either, but it put it all in context. It made me understand it better. It made me understand myself better in a way. I got to better create my own story, not create it, but understand the story by properly digging through it, and with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Seb, once again.
Well, thank your grandma. We thank your grandma. What's her name? What's her first name? What's her name?
Her name is, we'll say it in Swedish, Kerstin Frey.
Kerstin Frey.
So that's spelled Kerstin.
Kerstin Frey. Kerstin Frey sounds better.
You know what? I just thought about this, Christian, to your comments before about being a pillar. Well, that's the name of the Norse god Frey, and she was mighty, all right. So maybe something there.
That's it for this episode of What Lingers.
Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And also follow us on Instagram at Storytelling Lisbon to keep up to date.
What Lingers is a podcast from the team behind Storytelling Lisboa and is produced by Johnny Bunyan. He's amazing.
Thank you so much for listening, and join us again for another edition of What Lingers.
See you next week.